Easter eggs were abound in Stranger Things Season 4, but did you catch them all? One of the beautiful things about Stranger Things on Netflix is the simple fact that the show is set in the 80s in a small town via Hawkins, Indiana. That place and time also allows for all sorts of references to not just that decade, but to various things that we now hold in high esteem, via them being pop culture icons. And with each new season came more and more Easter eggs for people to go and look for. With Volume 1 of Season 4 out, let's dive in and see what was left behind. Paperboy video game. In the opening scene of the Stranger Things Season 4 premiere, there is an extended sequence of a rambunctious paperboy throwing a bunch of rolled-up newspapers haphazardly at suburban houses. It hits random parts of the yards, including the back of a car, a window, and a chair. That is likely a reference to the Midway arcade game, the self-explanatory Paperboy. It came out in 1985, a year before the fourth season of Stranger Things takes place. In fact, Paperboy came out for the home consoles such as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, a year later in 1986, which fits with this season. In the game, you would play as the titular Paperboy and attempt to throw your newspaper rolls to the designated houses. The closer to the house, the higher your score, though you would still get points if it didn't land exactly at their doorstep, including if you broke their windows. Meanwhile, the player would also have to dodge obstacles such as cars, other people, and even creatures grabbing at you from the sewers. The game is an all-time classic, and for Stranger Things to show it as a reference even loosely is honestly pretty cool. The X-Men. There are tons of references to Marvel's X-Men throughout the fourth season of Stranger Things, which makes a lot of sense, and it isn't the first time the show has referenced the popular mutant superhero team, as Millie Bobby Brown's Eleven is often compared to a superhero, and her experimentation is reminiscent of some X-Men arcs, such as Chris Claremont's God Loves, Man Kills. Furthermore, the X-Men comics were increasing in popularity in the 80s, with many of their most popular arcs like the aforementioned Man Kills and the Phoenix Saga released during that time. As for the references themselves, there's the fact that the Dungeons & Dragons Club, led by new character Eddie, Joseph Quinn, that Mike, Finn Wolfhard, and Dustin, Gaten Matarazzo, have joined in between seasons is called the Hellfire Club, which is a probable reference to a villainous group of mutants in the X-Men universe. Though to be fair, they haven't always been villainous, but more times than not they have been so, and it works here. Other than that, Dustin also makes a direct reference to Cerebro, a telepath amplifier in the X-Men comics, usually employed by Professor Xavier to find other mutants. It's the name Dustin gives to an improvised computer setup he made to track down and help his friend Eddie, who has gone on the run for a murder that he didn't commit. Finally, there's the Nina Project, which is a top-secret machine Eleven has put inside so she can regain as well as amplify her powers, reminiscent in look and function to Cerebro. Star Wars. Star Wars is perhaps the most popular geek property in the world. Today we're almost overloaded with Star Wars shows, present and upcoming. And it was similarly inescapable in the first half of the 80s, particularly right after the release of the original trilogy. There is a lot of material that existed during this time between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, and often predating the extended universe, now Legends, canon. This includes kid-targeted cartoons based on C-3PO and R2-D2 called Droids, as well as TV movies and an animated series about the Ewoks. In fact, sharp-eyed viewers can spot Jonathan Byers, Charlie Heaton, watching a snippet of the aforementioned Ewoks cartoon in the third episode of the fourth season. Also, 2 episodes earlier, Dustin tries to put on his best Han Solo impression when telling his friends, "Never tell me the odds," a quote from The Empire Strikes Back. And as the ratings have proven, the force is strong with this show. Carrie. It's a horror series, never forget that, so of course there are horror references here. One of the most overt references in Season 4 is Carrie. Both the 1974 horror novel by Stephen King, an overall major influence on the show in general, as well as the 1976 Brian De Palma film starring Sissy Spacek. This is because at the beginning of the season, Will, Noah Schnapp, and Eleven are now living in California, with Eleven struggling to fit in. This is the first time she's ever been educated in a public setting, rather than being homeschooled by Hopper, David Harbour, or in a secret experimental lab. Matters get worse, however, when she runs afoul of Valley Girl Queen Bee Angela, played by Elodie Grace Orkin. Angela and her posse relentlessly bully Eleven, now going by her birth name Jane, which give Eleven's latent telekinetic powers, making the parallels between Eleven and Carrie all the more explicit. When she gets bullied at a roller rink, one of the bullies even pours a milkshake all over her, in a scene directly calling back to the image of Carrie doused in pig's blood. The irony, of course, is that Eleven doesn't have her powers at this point, and so a rampage is averted, at that point in time at least. Nightmare on Elm Street. Season 4 of Stranger Things revels in Nightmare on Elm Street references. The entire plot of the villain is invading the dreams of teens and using their fears and anxieties and their thoughts to kill them in real life. Even the bloody deaths of his victims floating in the air is reminiscent of the first death in the original Nightmare film, as well as the plot about a perceived troublemaker being framed for the murder. However, the main Easter egg is the Duffer Brothers casting England in the series. He plays Victor Creel, framed for the murder of the villain in the 50s. He puts in a great performance, even if it's a more sympathetic one rather than the villainous work that you might have expected. But make no mistake, the twist and darkness that lies at the heart of the Creel family's tale more than makes up for him not being the villain this go around. Dark Dungeons. The popular tabletop role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D, have always been a big part of Stranger Things. In fact, the pilot episode opens with the main quartet, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, Caleb McLaughlin, and Will, playing the aforementioned RPG. It even plays a pivotal role in the characters defeating the villains of the Upside Down throughout the series. This includes helping them understand the 4th season's new villain, which they've dubbed Vecna, based on a wizard who harnesses the powers of a dark realm. The reason we're bringing this up, though, is that in the 80s there was a point where D&D games like it were cited as the cause of a satanic panic, believe it or not. The artist Jack Chick of the infamous Chick Tracks comics was an acolyte of both extreme evangelicalism and conservatism, and immediately jumped on the anti-D&D bandwagon. He wrote and drew the strip Dark Dungeons, where a girl uses spells she learned from D&D to control people. In episode 2 of season 4, basketball star Jason Mason Dye, whose girlfriend Eddie was framed for killing, retells nearly the same hypothetical about why Eddie, a known D&D player, is dangerous. Lord of the Rings. No, Sean Astin didn't come back this season, sadly. But if you look at Stranger Things as a whole, even without the movies as a reference, the books were influential in the kids' lives. Such as during the penultimate episode of Season 4 when Eddie compares the mission to stop Vecna with stepping into Mordor to stop Sauron. While they spot off quotes and character names, it comes into clear focus later how similar the Upside Down actually looks to Mordor, especially the Peter Jackson live-action versions. Eddie also mentions the burning of the Shire, which isn't in the films. It happens after the Sauron is defeated, and is in reference to the wholesome town of Hawkins succumbing to hate and fear, as well as the supernatural threat of the Upside Down. So what do you think? What do you think of this look at Stranger Things Season 4 Volume 1 and all the various references to pop culture that were spotted? Which of these were you able to grasp your first time out? Are you going to go and look for these references in your rewatch before Volume 2 comes out? What references do you expect to see in the final 2 episodes? Let us know in the comments below, and we will see you next time on the channel.